Editing in Vertigo. This essay was submitted to the UNLV Hart Winnie Wegner Spring 2020 Film Essay Competition, where it was awarded third place and a $500 prize. Thompson and Bordwell identify 4 dimensions across which editing can define the relationships between shots. These are graphic relations, rhythmic relations, spatial relations, and temporal relations. In Vertigo, all of these relationships are used to craft emotion and atmosphere and to shape how we perceive the narrative. The first major dialogue scene is set in Midge's apartment. This scene is important because it establishes 2 major editing conventions that recur throughout the film. Namely, these are the construction of space using the 180-degree axis and the use of production design to create a visual contrast between shots. The scene begins with an establishing shot of Scotty and Midge sitting across from each other, with Scotty balancing a cane. As Scotty's cane falls, a match-on action is used to draw us into a closer shot of Scotty in the center of the frame. This is the first shot of our shot-reverse shot sequence between Scotty and Midge, with the axis having been established between them. Even in this first sequence of shots, there is a strong visual contrast between Scotty's side of the room and Midge's side of the room. Scotty's side is dominated by darker tones that match his brown suit and cane, while Midge's side is dominated by whites and pastels. Aside from the brief flashback sequence, these are our first visual cues as to who these people are. Throughout the film, Midge is relegated to being a kind of background character, who only serves to bridge narrative events and provide a contrast with Scotty's love for Madeline. Like the things she is visually paired with, she is innocuous but superficial. Scotty, however, like his cane, is more utilitarian. Yet the cane also symbolizes an inner darkness or wound. It's notable that the cane does not appear much throughout the rest of the film, so its presence in this scene was used solely to make a visual statement, rather than to serve a purpose in the story. As Scotty gets up, the camera pans to follow his movement. When we cut back to Midge, we can see that a new axis has been established. Notably, a cheat cut is used to return to Scotty, as he is in a slightly different position the next time we see him. At this point, a new visual contrast between shots has been established, as we see some very interesting artwork behind Scotty on the wall. Unlike the rest of the decoration of Midge's apartment, this section of wall is decorated with artwork that is more somber and abstract. The Christian themes of the paintings seem to foreshadow Scotty's future encounters with churches, and the more abstract works perhaps reflect his fragmented soul. These are very odd decorations for Midge to have, given what we learn about her in the film. However, they make sense as a consequence of the production design being planned around the editing of the scene. Another example of this kind of contrast is seen in the next scene, where Scotty goes to meet Gavin to receive his assignment. The 2 of them are in a room filled with model ships and images of ships, but there are still visual contrasts between shots that may serve as cues to character motivation or to foreshadow future events. At one point, Scotty is standing next to a model of a ship in a glass case, while the reverse shot is Gavin backed by a rear projection depicting an actual shipyard. Like a person building a ship in a bottle, Gavin is constructing a false reality for Scotty to inhabit. This conversation could have merely taken place at Gavin's desk, but by having Scotty move about the space, shots can be composed and edited together to give us more information about the characters and the story. Just as the graphic relations between shots can be useful to contrast different characters, spatial and temporal relations between shots can give us insight into how characters relate to one another. There is a sequence of 3 edits spaced throughout the film, which I believe demonstrates this to a profound degree. These edits are located in the first scene at Ernie's, Scotty catching Madeline outside his apartment, and the final confrontation at the mission stairwell. In the first scene at Ernie's, there is a sequence of 5 cuts that mirrors the actions of Madeline and Scotty at a distance. As Madeline is preparing to leave the restaurant, she starts to walk by the area that Scotty is sitting at the bar. The camera pans with her movement until it is resting on the profile of her face in the center of the frame. We then cut to Scotty, who had been looking over his right shoulder. His head is in roughly the same position as hers in the frame, although he is slightly off to the left. We cut back to Madeline, who begins to turn her head to the right. We then cut to Scotty, who begins to turn his head to the left, possibly to avoid her gaze. As he turns his head left, we cut back to Madeline, who is continuing to turn her head to the right. She then turns her head back to the left and walks forward, out of the frame. We then cut back to Scotty, who turns his head left in order to watch her leave. Scotty is now in the right part of the frame, rather than the left. This simple sequence of cuts demonstrates a series of parallel yet contrasting head movements, which simultaneously links and separates these two characters. Later in the film, Scotty confronts Madeline as she is trying to leave his apartment. Here the relationship established in the previous set of cuts definitively changes when the two characters decide to go wandering together. Even though the two had spoken before at Scotty's apartment, this marks the beginning of their association under the pretext of mutual willingness. The 180-degree axis is established as Scotty approaches and leans on Madeline's car, as we match on action to a medium shot of Scotty. The two are speaking at quite a close distance, so that they are both in the frame simultaneously throughout the conversation. In one of the cuts, Madeline finishes Scotty's sentence for him.
Yeah, well, don't you think it's kind of a waste for the two of us
to wander separately?
The spiraling motion set in place at their first meeting now flows around the 180-degree axis, and the characters have become close enough that even the content of their dialogue overlaps. However, as we learn throughout the film, this pretext of mutual association was a further lie, part of Gavin's plan to use Scotty's vertigo in a murder scheme. When Scotty learns the truth, the unraveling of this pretext leads to his confrontation with Judy/Madeline in the bell tower stairs.
And then what did he do? Did he train you? Did he rehearse you? Did he tell you exactly what to do, what to say? You were a very apt pupil too, weren't you? You were a very apt pupil. But why did you pick on me?
Here we see the final culmination of the spiral movement established in the first scene at Ernie's. But now instead of cuts, we use a long take where the characters are physically moving around a set of spiral stairs. Where once the characters were separate, they are now together. Where once they were operating under mutual pretexts, now everything is revealed. The two characters have been joined in the same shot, with the same action, and even the same movement. We can see through this progression of a series of sequences that editing can not only determine the relationship of shot to shot, but the relationships between shots. The lead-up to the final confrontation at the top of the stairs is also worthy of mention. In the stair-climbing sequence, rhythmic, graphic, and spatial contrasts between shots all work together to create a deepening sense of tension and dizziness. Indeed, the cut that immediately leads into the long take is one that crosses the axis. This is not a mistake or a cheat, but a transition that has been earned through gradually building up a sense of disorientation in the preceding cuts. The stairway climb can be thought of as having an A-B structure, contrasting the shots of Scotty following Madeline up the stairs with the dolly zoom shots of Scotty's perspective of the stairwell. At first, the camera tilts upward and pans left as it follows the start of the ascent. We then cut to a shot from above as the actors approach the camera. Notably, the action roughly matches between shots, even though the characters are being viewed from a different distance and a different angle. Scotty then pauses to look downward, and we get an eye-line match from his perspective. The dizzying stairway zoom. When we cut back to Scotty, he is in a lower position in the frame and further away. Even though he has climbed upward, his progress within the frame seems to have been reset. The lack of visual cues within the stairwell itself and the abstract spiral form of the cutaway combine to give the space an Escher-esque quality. As Scotty moves upward in space, he moves downward in the frame, and perhaps downward into his own psychosis. This pattern then repeats, although the second zoom shot seems to display even more flights of spiral stairs. When we cut back to Scotty, his location in the frame has changed even more than it did the first time. He is even further away, and further down in the frame than he was before. He also recoils more strongly, seemingly reacting to the downward motion of the previous shot, and breaking the continuity of his upward climb. The relationships between these shots, and the relationships between their relationships, set the stage for the climactic moment at the end of the long take, where Scotty looks down and nothing happens.